In 1720, a Scottish gambler walked into France and convinced them to replace their entire economy with paper and fairy tales. 3 years later, the country was so broke that people were literally burning money for warmth because it was cheaper than buying firewood. His name was John Law. And if you think Sam Bankman-Fried was ambitious, you haven't met the man who invented modern central banking as a side hustle to avoid a murder charge. Here's the thing nobody tells you about financial history. Every disaster you're watching unfold right now. The endless money printing, the "this time it's different" mentality, the government promising they can manage inflation. All of it was beta tested in Paris 3 centuries ago. And it ended so badly that France banned paper money for the next 80 years. But let's start at the beginning, because you can't understand why your savings account is melting in 2026 without meeting the man who wrote the playbook. John Law wasn't supposed to change the world. He was supposed to hang. In 1694, this charming Scottish nobleman killed a man in a duel over a woman in London. The courts sentenced him to death. But Law had 2 things going for him: family money and absolutely zero respect for rules. He escaped prison, fled to Amsterdam, and spent the next 2 decades wandering Europe's gambling dens and stock exchanges, studying the mechanics of money like a con artist studying lock mechanisms. Here's where it gets interesting. While hiding from British justice, Law developed a theory: gold is stupid. Think about it from his perspective. You're holding a gold coin. It's heavy. It doesn't multiply. You can't make more of it by wishing really hard. And worst of all, if everyone wants gold at the same time, there's never enough to go around. Gold, Law realized, was the bottleneck strangling every economy in Europe. His solution? Paper. Beautiful, printable, infinitely flexible paper. Back it with something. Land. Future tax revenue. The promise of riches from colonial ventures. And suddenly, you've got all the money you need. By 1715, Law had written this all down in books and pamphlets. Most economists called him insane, but one country was desperate enough to listen. Let me paint you a picture of France in 1715. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, the guy who built Versailles, had just died after spending 72 years on the throne and approximately 500% of France's GDP on wars, palaces, and wigs that could house a family of 4. The national debt was 3 billion livres. Government revenue was 145 million livres per year. Do that math. France was so deep in debt that they were paying interest with borrowed money, then borrowing more to pay the interest on the borrowed interest. The debt spiral was so tight it was practically a black hole. The currency itself was a mess. France had so many different coins, gold louis, silver écus, copper liards, that nobody could agree on what anything was actually worth. Merchants were spending half their day just arguing about exchange rates. The money supply was rigid, frozen in metal, and there wasn't enough of it to make the economy move. Enter Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, ruling as regent for the child king, Louis XV. The traditional solutions, raise taxes, cut spending, devalue the currency again, had all been squeezed dry. France needed a miracle. John Law walked into Paris and said, "I can print you a miracle." Law's pitch was elegant, almost too elegant. First, he created a bank, the Banque Générale, in 1716. This wasn't revolutionary. Private banks existed. But Law's bank did something special. It issued paper notes that could be exchanged for coins at a fixed rate. Crucially, these notes could be used to pay taxes. Here's the mechanism. You deposit metal coins at Law's bank. You get paper notes. These notes don't weigh 40 pounds when you're trying to buy a house. They don't need armed guards when you transport them. And because the government accepts them for taxes, they're as good as gold. Better than gold, actually. Because Law could print more notes than he had coins. Not a lot more, just enough to grease the wheels of commerce. The economy started moving again. Merchants loved it. The government loved it. Law became a national hero. But that was just the warm-up. In 1717, Law created the Mississippi Company. The concept was simple. France controlled Louisiana, a massive territory in America that supposedly contained infinite riches in furs, tobacco, and minerals. Law's company would monopolize all trade with Louisiana, and investors could buy shares in these future profits. The shares were purchased with paper money from Law's bank. See the loop forming? Law prints money. People use that money to buy shares in his company. The share price goes up. More people want shares. Law prints more money to help them buy shares. The cycle feeds itself. By 1719, Law had merged his bank with the government, creating the Banque Royale, France's first central bank. He was printing the nation's official currency now, and he'd absorbed virtually every colonial trading monopoly in France into his Mississippi Company. One man controlled the money supply and the country's biggest corporation. He was essentially Jerome Powell, and the CEO of Apple rolled into one person, except with better clothes and worse ideas about monetary policy. What happened next is what always happens when you combine human greed with unlimited credit. A feeding frenzy. Mississippi Company shares were initially offered at 500 livres. In today's purchasing power, that's about $50,000, $60,000. People were buying shares for the equivalent of a year's salary. By December 1719, those same shares were trading at 10,000 livres, roughly $1 to $1.2 million in modern money. That's a 2,000% return in less than 2 years. The word millionaire was literally invented during this period to describe the new class of people getting stupidly rich on paper. Paris turned into a carnival. The Rue de Quincampoix, the narrow street where shares were traded, became so packed with speculators that the government had to close it at night to prevent riots. Servants were buying shares. Cobblers were buying shares. Prostitutes were reportedly accepting payment in Mississippi stock instead of coins because the stock was rising faster. The stories from this period sound like crypto Twitter in 2021. A beggar who held shares supposedly made enough money to buy a carriage. A hunchback rented out his back as a writing desk for traders to sign contracts on, charging premium rates. Everyone knew someone who'd turned 100 livres into 10,000. Law himself was now the richest, most powerful man in France. The regent made him Controller General of Finances, essentially the Prime Minister of Economics. A Scottish Protestant gambler was running Catholic France's economy. He bought chateaux. He collected art. He walked around Paris like a man who'd solved poverty. But here's what nobody wanted to think about. The Mississippi Territory wasn't producing anything yet. No gold mines, no tobacco plantations generating millions in revenue. The colony was a swamp with a few scattered forts and a lot of mosquitoes. The wealth was theoretical, future tense, conditional, and Law just kept printing. By 1720, he'd increased France's money supply by roughly 300%. There were paper livres everywhere, flooding the economy like a broken dam. And slowly, inevitably, people started to notice something. When you print 3 times more money, but the amount of actual goods, bread, wine, cloth, stays the same, prices don't stay still. The pile of paper needed to buy a chicken got thicker every week. The first crack appeared in early 1720. A few smart investors, guys who'd gotten rich on the way up, started quietly converting their shares back to coins, then converting those coins to gold, then converting that gold to assets outside France, because they could read a balance sheet and the numbers were starting to scream. Law tried to stop it. He issued a decree. You couldn't hold more than 500 livres in coins. If you had more, you had to turn it in for paper. This was, psychologically, the exact moment everyone realized the paper might be worthless. Nothing says our currency is strong, quite like making it illegal to use the old currency. Panic set in slowly, then very quickly. By May 1720, the Mississippi Company stock had crashed from 10,000 livres to 4,000, then 2,000, then back below the original 500. Law tried every trick. He banned trading in precious metals. He made owning gold jewelry illegal. He even raided homes looking for hidden coins like a financial secret police. None of it worked. The bank ran out of coins to redeem notes. Law started printing even faster, trying to paper over the hole with more paper, which is like trying to fix a flood by adding more water. Inflation went vertical. A chicken that cost 1 livre in 1719 cost 5 livres by mid-1720. Then 10. Then nobody was selling chickens for livres at all. By December 1720, the whole system collapsed. The Banque Royale shut down. Mississippi Company shares became collector's items for historians. The French economy cratered so hard that it didn't fully recover for decades. Thousands of families lost everything. The wealth that had been created on paper evaporated like morning fog because it had never been real in the first place. Law fled France in disguise, dying broke in Venice 9 years later. France banned paper money entirely and didn't try it again until Napoleon. Now let's talk about why this matters to you, sitting here in 2026. Do that math. We're paying interest on debt with borrowed money, then borrowing more to pay the interest on the borrowed money. The spiral is tightening. Since 2020, the Federal Reserve has expanded the money supply by approximately 40%. They called it quantitative easing and pandemic relief, which sounds much more professional than printing money to buy government bonds. But the mechanism is identical. Create dollars that didn't exist. Use them to purchase debt. Repeat. And just like in 1720s France, people noticed. Your rent didn't go up 40% because landlords suddenly got greedier. Your groceries didn't double because farmers got evil. Prices rose because there are more dollars chasing the same amount of stuff. The pile of paper you need to buy eggs got heavier than the eggs. We even have our own version of Mississippi Company mania. Cryptocurrency hit a combined market cap over $3 trillion in 2021 before crashing. NFTs of digital artwork sold for millions. People quit their jobs to trade meme stocks. The Rue de Quincampoix was called Reddit and Discord, but the psychology was identical. Limitless credit meeting unlimited greed. Here's the uncomfortable parallel. John Law wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He genuinely believed his system would work. He thought he'd found a way to create prosperity from nothing, to make everyone rich with accounting tricks and confidence. The central bankers of 2026 aren't villains either. They think they're solving problems. But the math doesn't care about intentions. When Law ran out of coins to back his paper, he printed more paper. When the Federal Reserve's balance sheet got too scary, they just changed the accounting standards and kept printing. The tools are more sophisticated now. The language is more technical. But the underlying mechanism, create money, hope the economy grows fast enough to justify it, panic when it doesn't, is the same mechanism that destroyed France. The difference is scale. John Law bankrupted one country. Our current financial system is global. When this unravels, not if, when, because it always unravels, there's nowhere to flee to. There's no Venice to die broke in because every major economy is playing the same game. John Law's story isn't a warning from history. It's a mirror. He proved that you can convince an entire nation to believe in paper wealth, to trade real assets for future promises, to sustain an illusion for years before gravity reasserts itself. And the most terrifying part, he almost pulled it off. If the Mississippi Territory had actually contained the riches everyone imagined, if Louisiana had pumped out gold and tobacco fast enough to justify the share prices, Law would be remembered as a genius instead of history's most successful failure. But the gold wasn't there. The mines were empty, and no amount of paper could print gold into existence. The money you're holding right now, in 2026, is backed by the same thing Law's livres were backed by: a promise. A promise that the government will pay its debts. A promise that the economy will grow. A promise that this time, somehow, we've figured out how to print prosperity without consequences. History suggests we haven't. The cycle continues. The mechanisms repeat. And 3 centuries from now, someone will make a video about whatever financial disaster we're currently building, explaining to future viewers that yes, we knew better, and no, we didn't stop. Subscribe to Papermint if you want to watch the next collapse in real time, armed with the knowledge that absolutely none of this is new. The villains change, the technology updates. But human stupidity? That's the one constant in financial history. It worked for John Law for a while. How long do you think it'll work for us?